Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Monday, November 25th slate of college basketball DFS. We are going to be talking about both the early slate and the main slates here in this episode. So if you are catching this a little bit later, if you're just here for the main slate, fast forward about 15 minutes-ish, and that'll kind of get you caught up to where we talk about the main slate. But I want to talk about both slates, because not only is the early slate an opportunity for us to win some money, but it's got some of the teams that are playing in some of these, Thanksgiving tournaments like the Maui Invitational. There's another one in Daytona Beach that tips off, where the teams that we talk about on this episode, whether it's the early slate, main slate, whatever, they're going to be teams that we're going to be seeing for the next 3 days at these Thanksgiving tournaments. So that way, even if I have to do, a college football episode tomorrow night or something of that nature, then everything that I'm talking about tonight is going to apply for these same guys on Tuesdays and Wednesdays games, as opposed to just talking about the Monday game. So this is a really good episode to listen to get yourself prepped for the start of Feast Week. And I hope to do another episode later on in the week where we can talk about some of the other teams that are going to be in action on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We got the Battle for Atlantis. We got the ESPN Events Invitational. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so that way you can be with us for that college basketball coverage as well. But if you were wondering why we're doing both slates, that is why, because all the teams that we're going to talk about, you're going to see again and again later on this week, whether it's the early slate or the main slate. So hopefully all this information can help you guys win some money, if not on Monday, on Tuesday or Wednesday. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to, these Thanksgiving style tournaments with back-to-back games, a lot of what DraftKings algorithm does is, factor in ownership. So if a guy is highly owned one day, whether they play poorly or not, or play well or not, they're going to be priced up the next day. So just keep that in mind. Pricing is going to be a little bit liquid here for these next few days. But the guys that are highly owned are going to go up. The guys that are lowly owned are going to go down, whether or not they play well or play poorly. So that's just going to be something to keep an eye out on. As always, a lot of the data, what we're going to talk about here is from KenPom. And that KenPom data is something that can certainly help you as we go forward on later on in the week. So with that being said, let's go ahead and end the introduction there. If this video does help you out in any way, please hit the like button. And again, make sure you subscribe. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college basketball season. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the early slate. All right, so game number one of the Maui Invitational. Game number one of this early slate is going to be Memphis taking on UConn, which oddly enough is being played at 8:30 a.m. local time by my estimates. Kind of crazy, but I get why they do it, because they want to have people watch this on TV. Anyway, this is the first game in what is a loaded Maui Invitational field. Really looking forward to watching this tournament. You guys that have been long-term listeners know that I teach high school math. I also coach 2 high school sports, girls flag football and varsity boys basketball. This is going to be an iPad on the desk kind of week for me, where I'm going to be watching college basketball during the school day. Don't tell anybody that I said that. Anyway, KenPom has this game projected to be 77-70 in favor of UConn. That is a game total of 147 points, which is the second highest here on the early slate. Now, on the Memphis side, they're not the most difficult team to figure out. Basically, they're going to run a lot of everything they do through PJ Haggerty, and he has been great so far this season. He's priced up at $7,800, and he's had 3 really good games, 3 games over 37 DraftKings points, which would absolutely pay off his salary. Little bit of a stinker against San Francisco, only 28 DraftKings points, but that's still not going to kill you if he puts that up in this one. What does concern me is that UConn is very clearly one of the best defensive teams in the country, but Memphis operates at the 43rd ranked tempo right now, according to KenPom. So they're going to have a ton of possessions. They're going to have a ton of opportunities. And I do think that Haggerty is going to be the engine that makes this Memphis offense go. I don't think he's a bad pick. And I think if you're going to look to stack both sides of this game, he's absolutely the guy you want from the Memphis side. Tyrese Hunter is kind of the 1B for this team. That's kind of been his role for his entire college basketball career. Every now and then he'll have these huge games, but for the most part, he is his team's second or third option. He's a transfer from Texas, which is the case where he was at last year. I don't see it as likely, with the current usage rate being Haggerty pretty significantly ahead of Hunter, that Hunter outperforms Haggerty. However, I do think that in DFS is often a game of ownership and game theory. More people are going to play Haggerty, so you will have some leverage if you do choose to play Hunter. Chester Rogers. I feel like Chester Rogers was a running back, right? I think. Anyway, Colby Rogers, is the correct name that I was looking for. Is a Wichita State transfer that plays a ton of minutes for this Memphis team. And if this game does get going up into high totals, he's a pretty solid play. The usage isn't super high, that the stats aren't super high, but he's only $5,000. There's not a lot of value to be had on this slate. I don't think he's a bad option, especially if you want to end up stacking this game. Now, what makes Memphis pretty difficult is the fact that they do rotate their bigs a ton. Basically, Danger, Jourdain, and Cisse are going to play probably about 20 to 25 is minutes, all three of them. And the production is varied, right? Danger is the guy that has the highest usage rate, has the best per minute production. You just never know how many minutes he's going to get. But when you look at this season, the 2 games he's gone above 25 minutes, he's gone above 29 DraftKings points. Like, he's a really solid per minute player. He's a high usage player when he's out there. Granted, I don't think Utah is like their interior defense. I don't think that's the way you want to attack them, but Danger would be the guy to do so. And so out of all the Memphis bigs, he would be the one that I would have the most hope for. However, I would likely only play him in GPP formats because if you remember from his time in Illinois, there'd be games where he just has these random foul trouble games or where he randomly plays 9 minutes and puts up 2 DraftKings points. Like, he's not a safe play by any means, but of the Memphis bigs, Danger, Cisse, and Jourdain, to me, Danger significantly has the highest ceiling. Now, on the UConn side, UConn is a little bit of a harder team to parse out how they're going to be in this game environment because they have not been tested so far this season. Like, you look at their game logs, and every game they have played has been at least a 35-point victory. Yeah, like they haven't played a close game yet. So we really don't know what's going to happen to this team with their minutes, with their usage in a closer game environment. So what I would want to look at for this UConn team is how many minutes are they playing right now? What is their usage right now? And, what might happen in a close game, right? So Alex Caravan is a guy that's going to have a lot of interest from me. He is averaging 30 minutes per game on the season. So, like, you're not going to see a big minute boost for Caravan, but this is a guy who can fill up the stat sheet in a myriad of ways. He's a stretch 4, which is going to give Memphis trouble, in my opinion, because Memphis, their bigs are not that fleet of foot. And I think that he is in a pretty solid spot with a pretty high usage rate. Caravan is absolutely a guy that I'm going to be getting into my lineups. Heading down from there, Solo Ball is also a guy that I'm going to be getting into my lineups. He has transitioned into the starting point guard role for this team. And he's put up 29 DraftKings points against New Hampshire, 27 against, I believe that was Stonehill. He's $6,800, which is a little expensive, but like I was saying, if you see his minute total increase, he hasn't played more than 29 minutes in a game this season. If you see his minute total increase, it's very likely that you're going to see his DraftKings point total increase. He is a high usage player. He can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways with rebounds, assists, blocks, and steals. So I do think the Solo Ball is a pretty solid option here on this slate. Another guy that I'm interested in for kind of a similar reason is Aiden Mahaney. He's a St. Mary's transfer. He was the offensive alpha at St. Mary's. Hasn't been so that way at UConn, but he does still start. He does still average getting up about 8 shots a game. And so if we do see him play boosted minutes, he could absolutely smash his price tag at $5,200. Again, I think he's more of a GPP play than a cash play because what if he just continues to see 19-ish minutes and put up about 15-ish fantasy points? That's not going to get it done. Now, where it gets interesting for UConn, though, is the forward position. Though Terrace Reed Jr. has been their highest usage player so far this season, but here's the problem. He doesn't start. And a lot of his production so far this year has been in garbage time. And with this game only projected, with a deficit of 7, according to KenPom, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of garbage time in this one. So I am not really all that enthusiastic about Terrace Reed Jr. I'm going to let other people chase what he's done so far, and I will evaluate it after Monday, whether I want to go back to him or not. Samson Johnson is the actual starting center for this team. So if we do see more minutes out of Samson Johnson, there is a big argument to be made that he could have more production. However, he is a supremely low usage player. He is a guy who is really just out there to get boards and protect the rim, of which he has at least 2 blocks in every game so far this season. So I'm a little less enthusiastic about him. Really, if I'm playing a forward for UConn, it's going to be Alex Caravan, who we already talked about, or the freshman Liam McNeely. So much like Caravan, he is averaging around 30 minutes a game. So you're not going to see a huge boost in minutes, but this is a guy who can fill up a stat sheet. He's priced at $7,000, pretty high usage rate, really high shot rate, and he can fill it up from 3 as well. $7,000 I think is a little high for my taste, but again, if he does see more usage because we have a closer game, then he absolutely can smash even that high price tag of $7,000. Game number 2, we've got Penn State taking on Fordham, which is in Daytona Beach. I do not know what the name of the Daytona Beach Thanksgiving tournament is, but I do know that this game is one of them that is in Daytona Beach. Basically, KenPom has Penn State favored to win this game 85-70. That makes Kent State the highest team total on the slate, according to KenPom, and the highest game total on the slate, according to KenPom. So we want to get some Penn State guys in our lineup. So who do we want to get in our lineup? Well, Ace Baldwin Jr. is always a great pick. He has one of the highest usage rates in the country right now. This is also a guy who will get you a ton of assists. He averaged almost 8 assists a game, and he averages about 3 rebounds rebounds a game as well. This is just a great play in my opinion. In my opinion, he is the top overall play on this entire early slate. He is the number one guy that I want to get to. Yes, he is going to be highly owned, but if you look at his game log, he very clearly has the upside to just totally break a slate. His last 2 games have both been over 40 DraftKings points, which would be outstanding for a salary of $9,200. So I am all over Ace Baldwin here on this slate. Now, the next guy up in terms of pricing is Yannick Conan Niederhauser, who is a transfer from Northern Illinois, I believe, who had a huge last game against Indiana Purdue Fort Wayne. But this is a guy that I am concerned about playing in this game environment. He doesn't play a whole lot of minutes, barely averages over 20. He can block a ton of shots. He can grab a ton of rebounds, but he can also foul a lot as well. And so I'm a little bit concerned, even though he is a high usage player, even though he does have a ton of upside, I'm a little concerned about foul trouble. I think he's a little expensive, but he is a guy that you can go to in GPPs because he does have that legitimate upside. Just don't be mad when you watch this game and he's got 2 quick fouls and he's on the bench with 14 minutes left in the first half. My second favorite play on the Penn State side is going to be Zach Hicks. The usage rate isn't like insanely impressive. Only 16% usage, but a 21% shot rate. So he is getting up a decent amount of shots. He can get you boards and assists as well, averaging 5 boards and 2 assists per game, also averaging about 2 steals per game as well. So he can really fill up a stat sheet. And what I really like to see about Zach Hicks is the one somewhat close game that Penn State has played so far this year was against Virginia Tech. He had 35 DraftKings points in that game. He played 35 minutes in that game, and he had his highest usage rate of the season in that game. So I think this is a great spot for Zach Hicks, that if this game environment is close, I think that Penn State dropped us a little nugget in that Virginia Tech game, that if the game environment stays close, Zach Hicks is going to be one of their go-to guys. Nick Kern, Puff Johnson, Damian Dunn are all going to play a ton of minutes, but they're all just ancillary pieces in this lineup for Ace Baldwin, if I'm being honest. If Baldwin were to get in foul trouble, I think Dunn would have the most upside. So I think if you're looking for some leverage off of Baldwin, Dunn would be your guy. But other than that, these are just supporting players. And if you're looking to game stack, if you're looking to stack this team up, I think they're great options to do so with that. But I'm going to be sticking with Baldwin and Hicks primarily from Penn State. Now, on the Fordham side, this is a team that is quite interesting. They're also quite small. So I do think that should give Hicks and Conan Niederhauser a little bit of an advantage. But they're not bad. Like this is a team that's probably going to finish middle of the road in the A10. They are 3-2 so far this season, losing to St. John's, Manhattan, and Drexel. They're not bad. This is a team that is probably going to keep this game fairly competitive, in my opinion. The guy that I like on this team is Jackie Johnson III. He is a transfer from UNLV, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And he has been their most high usage player so far this season. He operates at a 33.7% usage rate, which is literally the 18th highest out of anybody in the nation, according to Ken Pom. 37% shot rate as well. This is the guy who's going to have the ball in his hands. And if this team is going to score a lot of points, this is the guy that's going to do it. He averages 19 so far this season. He's also shown a ton of upside on DraftKings, having 2 DraftKings performances over 36 DraftKings points. This is the guy you want, in my opinion. The only thing that worries me is Ace Baldwin Jr. is a pretty good perimeter defender. And so if they stick Baldwin Jr. on Johnson, that might make time a little bit tough for him, but he's still going to get so many shots that some of them have to go in, right? And if he's not going to be the one taking the shots, well, then it's probably going to be Jeffet Medor, who's down here at $6,000. The only concern about him is, with the exception of the last game against Drexel, he really hasn't done a whole lot in terms of the peripheral stats. But in that game against Drexel, he did have 8 boards and 5 assists. It was his second best DraftKings point total of the season. This is absolutely a guy that I'm going to be looking for, and I think he's a great pivot off of Jackie Johnson. I also think that Will Richardson, even though he's overpriced, is a solid pivot off of Jackie Johnson as well. He thrives a little more on assists, so I think that this would be a guy who you would want to get into your lineup, if you're looking to stack this game up or stack this team up. One of the most interesting pieces here on this one is Abdou Simbila, who is newly entered into the starting lineup. He started against Drexel, played 30 minutes, put up 24.5 DraftKings points. If he's going to continue to play 30 minutes, I think it's reasonable to continue to expect that point total from him. And at a salary of $6,200, that's 4x value, which is really what we want. 200 points will get you a min cash in a GPP. So if he's going to give you those 24 DraftKings points, again, he's absolutely a guy that you can go after. And he's a guy that is going to be making my lineups for that reason. The only other guy that I really want to talk about is Joshua Rivera. Comes off the bench. He's just a role player, but he's okay. I think that, on a slate that there's not a whole lot of value to come by, I think 3,600 Josh Rivera is not a bad option. And then Ramad Dean is the other starter that we didn't talk about. He's not of a whole lot of interest to me. Super low usage rate player, not a high minute rate player either. So just not a whole lot of interest for me there. Last game of this slate, we've got Colorado taking on Michigan State, and this is actually the worst game environment in the slate according to KenPom. KenPom has it projected to be 71-68 in favor of the Spartans with a game total of 139 points, and this is the last game on this slate that's in the Maui Invitational. It's actually the second game in the Maui Invitational. Regardless, honestly, if they seeded the Maui Invitational, I think these would be like your 7 and 6 seed, maybe. No, you're maybe like the 7 and 8. If I'm being honest, depending on how you feel about Dayton. These are the 7 and 8 seed in the Maui Invitational. Anyway, Jaden Akins is the guy that you want on the Michigan State side. He has the highest usage rate. He's had 3 games this season over 31 DraftKings points, 2 games over 42. He's taken the most shots. He is the engine that makes the offense run. He had an absolute dud against Kansas, but Kansas has elite perimeter defenders. I'm not seeing that issue with Colorado. This is the guy you want in your lineups. I think he's a great piece to play from the Michigan State side. Now, Frankie Fiddler is another guy that has a pretty high shot rate, but my worry with him is that he really isn't giving you a whole lot other than scoring. He's priced at 6,100, but he's only had 1 game of 25 DraftKings points or more, and that was exactly 25 DraftKings points. So he hasn't shown a consistent ability to hit 4x value for his salary. He's not of interest to me when he's at that price tag. If he drops down, though, later on in the week, that's where I'm going to be interested. Now, Trey Holloman is a guy that plays a ton of minutes off the bench for this team. Granted, he can be hot and cold. He can get 9 assists. He can get 0 assists. Like you don't really know what to expect with him. What you can expect though is that he's going to play a decent amount of minutes. He's going to be involved in the game plan. He's going to come in and he's going to get shots up. He's going to have the ball in his hands. So $5,400 Trey Holloman, I don't think is a bad option. Again, this is a slate that doesn't have a lot of value on it. So $5,400 for a guy like Holloman is not a bad option in my opinion. And then Jeremy Fears is the other guard on this team. Technically the starting point guard, but he cedes a lot of minutes to Holloman. And so if you're going to be playing Holloman, don't play Fears in the same lineup because they're competing with each other for minutes, and they kind of play alongside Akins. So that would be my advice on those two guys. For the bigs for Michigan State, they went to a really big starting lineup last game against Samford where they started Simon Zapala and Jackson Kohler. They're both 5 men. It doesn't make a lot of sense to start both of them together, but hey, I'm not Tom Izzo. What do I know? I'm not that interested in Zapala. He has not played more than 19 minutes in a game this season, and he has not shown an ability to hit 4x value for his salary. Kohler has, but Kohler also doesn't play a big minute total. If Kohler were to come out and play 25 minutes, he could break the slate, but I don't think there's any guarantee that he's going to do so. But he does have a little bit of interest from me at $5,300 because there is the chance that he might do that. Xavier Booker, Carson Cooper, Cohen Carr all come off the bench. They don't play a ton of minutes. They're all competing for a role. Like they're just not. I just don't have a lot of interest in them. But I wanted to get the names out there in case you guys are wondering. On the Colorado side, they're an interesting little team. So they return basically nobody from last year's team. Last year's team that won a game in the NCAA tournament, they are not that, in my opinion, this year. I struggle to see this team making the NCAA tournament. Anyway, on the Colorado side, their highest usage player is currently Trevor Baskin. He just moved into the starting lineup last game. And in that game, he put up 29 DraftKings points in 20 minutes against Harvard. And so if he's going to be in the starting lineup and he's going to play a lot of minutes, he's certainly worth a look, in my opinion. $6,400 is a very reasonable price tag to pay. Their best player through the entire season has been Andrei Jakimovsky. He's a transfer from Washington State. In the 4 games that they've played, he has put up at least 23 DraftKings points in all of them. To me, this would be a great cash game option. He does lead this Colorado team in shot rate. He's going to be a guy who is probably going to be getting up a lot of shots. And what they do is they play him at the 4 spot, which I think is a spot where you can attack this Michigan State team, given that they play 2 big bigs out there. So he's going to stretch the floor. He's going to be able to use his speed and his quickness to get by him. I think he's a pretty solid option at $6,300. After that, Malone has a super high usage rate, but he doesn't play a ton of minutes. I kind of put him in the same category with Baskin, except I like the fact that Baskin was just moved into the starting lineup. They both don't play a ton of minutes, but have the potential to break the slate if they do play a ton of minutes. The guard I'm interested in on this team the most is going to be Julian Hammond III. He is like the one returning player from this team. I think in a closer game, you're going to see him play more minutes, which is what happened in the game against Northern Colorado. He played 33 minutes, put up 22 DraftKings points in that game. And that is absolutely enough that that's value in DraftKings, right? That's absolutely a great play. I think $4,700. I think he's one of the easiest clicks at the guard position, in my opinion. Javon Ruffin also was a guy that plays a ton of minutes, but he moved to the bench when they moved Baskin into the starting lineup. However, in that game where he moved to the bench, he still put up 25 DraftKings points. So I would probably personally say that Ruffin and Hammond are going to be competing with each other. I probably wouldn't want to play them both together. But with Baskin in the starting lineup, there's not going to be as many minutes where they're both on the floor. And so I don't think that that's a great combination to play with each other. They're kind of in each other's way with each other's ceiling. All right, that's going to do it for the early slate, though. So hopefully that gave you guys all the information you need to build some lineups on the early slate. Let's take a quick breather, and then let's move on to the main slate. All right, so before we get started on the main slate, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I am more than happy to answer any questions you might have if you reach out to me on Twitter. And honestly, with these teams in these games, like a lot of these guys are going to pop up on slates again. I might not have videos for every single slate. So if there's ever a slate where I don't have a video for it, and you just want to know my opinion or anything like that, just reach out to me on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer. I will also tweet out all updates for the show that are necessary. Also, I'm in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a bunch of really good, really smart people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. The college basketball chat in there has been jumping lately. I wish I could count how many takedowns we've had in that chat so far this season. But it's a lot. Like pretty much almost every night, somebody in the Discord takes down one of the tournaments, whether it's the N1, whether it's the quarter jukebox, whether it's the high five, the big jam, whatever. It's pretty much we're having a winner in there like pretty often. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, or just looking to sweat it out with and talk DFS with people, just Fantasy Corner Discord is the place to go. College basketball is not the only sport in there either. We got all sports covered in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Also, if you want to know who actually makes my lineups for every single college basketball slate, including the ones that I don't have content for, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I have an article for every slate where I tweet out my core as well as why they are my core. Now, granted, some days, especially on days where there's multiple slates, sometimes I don't get the full-fledged article out there, but you do get the core for every single slate. And you do get some well-reasoned thoughts as to why they are my core for every single slate as well. So you're not just getting the plays, but you're getting information that can help you get better at college basketball DFS. All right, so now let's go ahead and break down the main slate. So the first game up is going to be Michigan taking on Virginia Tech. This game is in the Fort Myers tip-off. KenPom has it projected to be 76 to 65 in favor of Michigan with a game total of 141 points. Now on the Michigan side, this is like an interesting team. They've only played one really close game this season. It was to Wake Forest, and they lost it. And in any game this season, Danny Wolf has been the main guy offensively, but he's been very enigmatic. Like there have been games where he's just been an absolute dud, like when he had 9 DraftKings points against Wake. There's also games where he can have a potential to break the slate, like when he had 41.5 against TCU a few nights later. So this is a guy that has certainly a high ceiling. He's going to have a lot of upside. I think he's got a pretty good matchup against the Virginia Tech bigs. Virginia Tech, not a great rebounding team. They're coming off a loss to Jacksonville where they really got battered on the boards. So I think this is a pretty good spot for Danny Wolf. $8,200, reasonable price tag. GPP play only though because of his volatility. After Wolf, the main guy I'm interested in is Roddy Gale. In that game against Wake Forest, he had the ball in his hands quite a bit. 20 DraftKings points in that game. It's actually his lowest on the season, though. He's been over 20 in every single game. 27 is his season high. He's got a decent amount of upside for a guy at $5,900, and I really do think you're going to see more usage out of him in closer game environments as we go throughout the season, because this was a guy that was pretty much Ohio State's second best player last year, and I think he could very easily be the same for Michigan here this year. Trey Donaldson is an Auburn transfer that just never really played a ton of minutes at Auburn, but this is a guy who can absolutely fill up a stat sheet, super high assist rate, $6,200, reasonable price tag. I think he's best used as a stacking partner with either Wolf or Roddy Gale Jr., though. I think he's a guy that you want to stack because of the assists that he's able to get. Vlad Golden is a transfer from Florida Atlantic, followed his head coach over to Michigan. Problem is with Vlad is he doesn't play a ton of minutes, right? Like he hasn't played more than 27 minutes in a game this season. That was the MO at Florida Atlantic. But at Florida Atlantic, he was a much higher usage player because Florida Atlantic didn't have Danny Wolf next to him. So I don't think this is a great spot for Vlad Golden. I think he's too expensive. If his price tag comes down later in the week, I might have some interest. After that, Reuben Jones is another transfer for this Michigan team that has been kind of enigmatic this season, but when he plays, the ball's in his hands quite a bit. $4,900, I think he's a little overpriced personally, but I think he's certainly worth a look. On the Virginia Tech side, they run everything through their two bigs, Toby Lawal and Malajel Poteet. Poteet has been actually the better player recently, though. He had 28 DraftKings points against Jacksonville. He's the bigger of the two. He is the more aggressive of the two, and he gets to the foul line a lot. So I think that he's not a bad look. I don't think that Michigan's exactly the front court you want to attack, though. with Wolf and Golden next to each other. That's a pretty formidable duo. So while we know that Poteet's going to have the ball a lot, we know he's going to get to the foul line a lot. I don't necessarily think that this is the best matchup for him. Lawal, I would rather just play Poteet. Lawal's best games have been against poor competition. In more closer game environments, the games they've lost, Poteet's been the better play. At the guard position, Shutt, Rexsteiner, and Johnson all play a ton of minutes for this Virginia Tech team, especially in closer game environments, but the usage rate isn't all that impressive for either of them. The DraftKings production isn't all that impressive for either of them. It's probably a pass from me. Jaden Young is the guard that will come off the bench. He played a ton of minutes against Jacksonville, played 28, was kind of a dud though, only 11 DraftKings points. He probably would get more interest from me than the other guards simply because when he comes in, he does have a higher usage and higher shot rate, but the minute totals are what's super volatile, so you don't really know what to expect. Again, I would classify him as a GPP only type of play here on this slate. Next game up, we've got Clemson taking on San Francisco. This is another game that is in Daytona Beach. Again, I wish I remember what the name of this tournament was. Anyway, this is projected to be a pretty close game. KenPom has this one as 73-70 in favor of the Clemson Tigers. And that Clemson team, I think they're a team that you don't really need to overthink when you're looking at them from DFS perspective. They have a very, very clear big three. After that, there's not really anybody who is super duper involved in the offensive game plan. There's not anybody who, to me, has potential to break the slate. Now, I could be wrong, but if that burns me, that burns me. I'm willing to live with what I see in the numbers for this Clemson team so far. And so that big three is Ian Shefflin, Chase Hunter, and Victor Lacken. Shefflin, in my opinion, is the best play of the three. He is their power forward. He comes with a ton of upside. He's already hit over 43 DraftKings points so far this season. And he doesn't need a whole lot of shots to get there because he is an elite rebounder. He's also a pretty good playmaker with the ball, averaging over 2 assists a game, and also averaging about a block a game. So I do think that this is a pretty good play, in my opinion. You know you're going to see a ton of minutes. You know you're going to see a ton of usage. $7,500 is right around where I think he should be priced as well. So he's a guy that I would definitely have in my player pool tomorrow night. Chase Hunter is their lead guard. Now, what is interesting is this Clemson team has lost one game. That was to Boise State. Other than that, they've kind of cruised to their other victories. They haven't really been super duper tested. But in that game against Boise State, Chase Hunter took 21 shots, also had 6 assists, put up 46.5 DraftKings points. If he's going to do that in close games, he's got to be in your player pool, right? Like so many of the variables here on this college basketball slate are a lot of these teams haven't played a lot of close games yet. So look in the box scores, look at the game logs at the close games, look at those usages. And Chase Hunter in the close game that Clemson's played has been great. So he's absolutely a guy that's going to make my player pool. The third guy in their big three is Victor Lacken. He's a transfer from Cincinnati. Problem is with Victor Lacken is he does not play a super big minute total. But when you look at the 2 closest games they played, that game against Boise, he played 25 minutes. 13-point victory against Eastern Kentucky, he played 30 minutes. So maybe if this game does stay close, maybe he plays more minutes. I probably wouldn't pair Shefflin and Lacken together because they're going to be competing for the same boards. But I do think that they're both going to make my player pool. After that, Zachary and Foster are the other 2 starters. I just don't have a whole lot of interest because they just don't really take a whole lot of shots, don't really have any slate breaking ability, in my opinion. Zachary's best game occurred against St. Francis, Pennsylvania. I got to see a guy do it in a game against legitimate competition. Chauncey Wiggins is also the first guy off the bench as a big. He's been great in their blowout games this year, not so great in the closer game environments. All right, next up, San Francisco. So on the San Francisco side, their pricing on DraftKings is a little bit weird to me because their usage leader is Malik Thomas, $6,700. He also averages about 32 DraftKings points per game. I think he's going to be pretty chalky because I think a lot of people are going to look at his salary, look at his fantasy points per game and say, oh, that's a good play. I'm going to click Malik Thomas. But it checks out. He plays at about a 30% usage rate, 28% shot rate. He's a really good player too. And he's shown the ability to break a DraftKings slate. He's got 42 DraftKings points in game 1, 38 DraftKings points against Memphis. I think he's a pretty solid play. He's the guy from this San Francisco side that I would be looking to get to. Marcus Williams plays a ton of minutes. He's kind of like one of the guards that runs the show for this team. Super high assist rate will get you some boards as well. Not quite the on-the-ball scorer that Malik Thomas is, though. So I would rather play Thomas for $700 cheaper. And then Tyrone Riley is like a rebounding guard. I think he's overpriced, though. I don't think anybody's going to play Tyler Riley. So if you want to have at it with Tyler Riley, go for it. He's not my favorite play, but he's going to be low owned. And so remember, we've talked about this time and time again on the show. If you've listened to us for years, in DFS, sometimes a bad play becomes a good play when no one plays him and that guy happens to go off. This guy does have an ability to go off, and no one's going to play him. I'm not going to be playing him, though. If he beats me, he beats me. The bigs for this team, the starters are Carlton Lingard and Ndueto Newberry. Lingard doesn't play a lot of minutes, though. He did play a ton of minutes in their game against Boise State that they won 84-73. But every other game other than that, he just hasn't played a lot of minutes, and it's kind of hard to score a lot of DraftKings points when you're not playing a lot of minutes. Ndueto Newberry is a pretty solid player. He had his best game in that game against Boise State where he played 36 minutes. I think it's more likely that you do see more minutes out of Lingard and Newberry in this game because they're going to have to keep size on the floor to keep up with Shefflin and Lacken. So if these two guys play a lot of minutes, they're going to have some opportunity to put up DraftKings points. I don't mind it. I'm not interested in anybody off the bench on this team, though. This team doesn't play a whole lot of like bench pieces a lot, so I'm just not really all interested. I'm just going to stick with that starting five. Next game up, we've got the worst game environment slate. We've got Oregon State taking on North Texas. Both the teams in this game rank outside the top 330 in the nation in tempo. So it should come as no surprise that this game is projected to be 66-61 in favor of North Texas. Game total of 127 points, which is by far the lowest on the slate. On the Oregon State side, their best player is Michael Rataj. He's great. He's shown the ability to get home in bad game environments. You look at his game log, he's over 38 DraftKings points in 4 straight. And in all of them, it's either been a massive blowout and he didn't play a full load, or it's been a game that didn't feature 130 total points scored, with the exception of the Oregon game. So I think he's a pretty solid play. I would prefer not to play like one of the studs in my lineup at $8,500 in this game environment. But, hey, he's a good play. What can I say? After him, DeMarco Minor is like the main one I'm interested in. He's the second on the team in usage, second on the team in shot rate. He can shoot them out of a game like he did against actually they won that game, but he was 1 for 11 against Washington State. Or is that Weber State? I think it's Weber State. He was not good in that game. But basically, he's been over 25 DraftKings points in every single game. Super high floor player, going to have the ball in his hand a ton. But this is an awful game environment, and I'm probably not going to be looking to play multiple Oregon State guys from this game environment. The other guy that I'm interested in is Parsa Falah. He is a starter at the big position for this team. If this game does stay close, I think it's likely that he plays a high minute total. And at $4,700 on a slate where there's not a whole lot of obvious value, I think he is an option as a value play. And to me, it's easier to play your value plays from a game like this, because if your value play doesn't get home and like they score 12 DraftKings points where you were expecting 20, you're only off pace by 8 points. You can make that up elsewhere. Whereas if you play a stud in this game and you're projecting them to score 40 and they only get to 27, well, then now you got to make up 13 points and that's your stud. So I don't mind the logic behind playing follow there. On the North Texas side, the good news is that all their guys are really cheap. Jonathan Massey, in my opinion, is their best player. And the DraftKings totals kind of bear that out. He is he's kind of a wing who is a slasher, very good rebounder as well. He comes off the bench, but he plays a ton of minutes off the bench. He basically plays a starter's load of minutes. And he's been pretty good this season, 2 games over 27 DraftKings points, $5,200. I think he's a guy that they're going to be running a lot through. He does lead the team in usage. He's a guy that I am interested in, even though I do think this game environment is quite poor. Jasper Floyd is second on the team in usage, and he's just too expensive for what this North Texas team likes to do. Like, this is not going to be a high scoring game. This is a guy who's dependent on peripheral stats in order to get there, and I just don't see it happening with him. Atten Wright is another guy that has a pretty high usage rate, but he only scores. And so why play a guy who's only going to score in a game that's not going to feature a whole lot of scoring? So I just don't see either of the two of them being great plays. And really, there's not a whole lot outside of those two that you can be interested in. Mule Sissoko, excuse me, is a Dayton transfer who starts at center for them, but he has a very erratic minute total. If he were ever to play a ton of minutes, he could give you a lot of points, but I'm just not super interested in that. Grant Newell is the other starting big, but he does not play with a high usage rate. To me, Massey is the guy I'm going to be playing on this team. Next up, we've got a much better game environment. South Carolina taking on Xavier, another game in the Fort Myers tip-off. KenPom has this one projected to be Xavier 74-71 with a game total of 145 points, which is much better than the last one. On the South Carolina side, they've got Colin Murray Boyles. He is their best player. He is their usage leader. I think he's overpriced. I'm just going to say it. He's up here at $9,600. He hasn't had a game this year over 4x value for that salary, or 5x value for that salary. Like, he has a lot of games in his game log between 34 and 40 DraftKings points, and that's okay. But that's not slate breaking. It's not going to win you a GPP, and I don't see it happening against the Xavier front court. So he's probably a pass to me until he comes down in price. Their lead guard on the ball is Jamari Thomas. He's a Norfolk State transfer. He's pretty good. He did have 30 DraftKings points in their last game against Mercer. Doesn't need a lot of shots to get there either. He is going to get you steals. He does average 3 rebounds and 3 assists per game. I think he's a pretty solid option. I think if you're looking to stack this game up, he would be my number one candidate for a game stack because of his ability to put up those peripheral steals and the fact that he is their highest usage guard. After that, Jacoby Wright does have a little interest for me. He is a starter for this team. If he were in the 5K range, I'd be all over him, but up at $6,000 is a little tough. Even though he does have 22 DraftKings points in 4 or 5 games this year. Nick Pringle, transfer from Alabama, elite rebounder, but super erratic. That was the case when he was at Alabama as well. I think 5,700. I don't think I can pull the trigger on that one. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Xavier then. On the Xavier side, they are interesting because basically they have a lot of the same archetypes that they had last year, but different players in those spots. And they're also returning 2 players from 2 years ago that were injured last year. It's an interesting group. So Ryan Conwell is a transfer from Indiana State, who is primarily a scorer. He's kind of like their Quincy Oliveri from last year. And Quincy Oliveri did have some games last year where he did absolutely break some slates. This is a guy who can put the ball in the bucket. He's going to lead them in shots. I think he's a much better play in a close game environment than a blowout. As you can see in his game log, the game against Texas Southern, they only won by 9. He played 36 minutes, put up 35 DraftKings points. I think he's a pretty solid play. I really do. $7,600, reasonable price tag to pay for a guy who has that upside. Davion McKnight is a returner from last year. He's a super high assist rate player. So again, much like with Jamari Thomas on the other side, if you're looking to stack this game, he would be my candidate to stack the game with, because if he's getting a lot of assists, somebody else is going to be scoring them. But his actual usage rate to me isn't high enough to warrant his price tag at $7,200. Zach Fremantle is the guy that is returning from injury from last year. He was a gross misprice when they played Wake about a week ago. He was $4,100 on that slate. He was super chalky, but he was great. He put up 28.5 DraftKings points. In fact, he's been over 28 DraftKings points in every single game so far this season. And at that salary of $6,800, that's over 4x value. I think this is a great spot for Zach Fremantle. I think he's a great play at $6,800. And then after him, I do have to mention the other guy they're getting back from injury from last year was Jerome Hunter. He was a backup big for this team 2 years ago. He's a backup big now. He's going to play probably between 18 to 20 minutes. When he's out there, he's a high usage player. He's a high rebound rate player. I don't mind the idea of playing him if you think that Fremantle or their other starting big gets in foul trouble. Marcus Foster is a Furman transfer who's been kind of enigmatic in his game log, but he's not a bad option in my opinion. Like I think there's certainly worse options on this slate than him, but he's probably not going to make my player pool. I think $6,300 is a little too expensive. So I had to find in my notes the other starting big for this team. There really isn't one. Zach Fremantle is the starting big. Dalen Swain, though, is a guy that starts, and he's $5,400, and he has dual eligibility. This is a guy who can fill up a stat sheet in a variety of ways. He's at his best when the game gets going up and down because he is dependent on those peripheral stats. $5,400 for a guy who plays his minute total and puts up peripheral stats in the way that he does. Not a bad option, especially as a game stacking option. So I got a little sidetracked there, but their starting 5 is Conwell, McKnight, Fremantle, Foster, and Swain, with Fremantle being the only big. I think that all 5 of those guys can absolutely be playable. Fremantle is probably my favorite one, but I do like Conwell, I do like Swain, and I do like McKnight and the game stacking option. All right, next up, we've got 2 games left. We've got the game of the day, in my opinion. Auburn taking on Iowa State. This is the second to last game in the Maui Invitational. KenPom has it to be 75-71 in favor of Auburn with a game total of 146 points. On the Auburn side, it is unknown whether or not they had any shenanigans on the plane over to Hawaii, but I can tell you this, if you do have any shenanigans on the plane to Hawaii, there's a good chance that it happened over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and there is nowhere good to turn that plane around if you're over the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So I hope they got there safely. Anyway, when you talk about Auburn, you got to talk about Johni Broome. He is one of the best players in the country. He does have the ability to break a DraftKings slate, as evidenced by his 60 DraftKings points against North Alabama. The thing is with Johni Broome and with a lot of Auburn guys is Bruce Pearl plays a huge rotation with a lot of guys, and you never really know how many minutes they're going to get. But ever since the plane incident, that's what I'm going to be calling it. Against Houston, Johni Broome played 33 minutes, put up 47 DraftKings points. The next 2, he played 28 in a blowout win against Kent State, 26 in a blowout win against North Alabama. So without the plane guys, he plays a ton of minutes, and he's going to get a high usage rate. He's going to put up a ton of stats while he's out there. So if the 2 plane guys, and by that I mean Jaheim Hudson and Jakai Howard, if they're out, then you're going to see a ton of minutes out of Broom again, and I think Broom's a pretty solid option if that's the case. Chaney Johnson is next up in terms of DraftKings pricing, but I don't know, man. Honestly, it's really hard for me to target Auburn guys not named Janai Broom because you just don't know what their minute totals are going to look like. You don't know what their usage totals are going to look like. Denver Jones is kind of stepping into more of the true point guard role for this team. They switched up their starting lineup, and he has been pretty good since they did that. 31 DraftKings points against North Alabama. He was in my lineups that night. I think he's a solid option. $5,500 though. I wish he was a little bit cheaper. And then really, Chad Baker-Mazara is another one of these like enigmatic players that you could play in a GPP. JP Pegues is kind of seeing a little bit of a backseat. Miles Kelly is kind of seeing a super enigmatic usage. So I just don't. And then you got the freshman, Tahad Pettiford, who was great against Houston and has been just mediocre ever since. So like really the Auburn guys outside of Broom, you're really taking your chances. Jones would probably be my favorite outside of Broom though. But honestly, they're projected to score 75 points. This is a great game. Somebody's got to do some scoring other than Broom, right? So I mean, you might want to take some shots at him, but it's hard to argue for guys when you don't know what their minute totals are going to be. You don't know what their shot totals are going to be. On the Iowa State side, they have not been tested yet at all. And so what you've seen is basically you haven't seen full minute loads or full usages out of their lead guards, Tamin Lipsey and Keshawn Gilbert. I think it's quite likely that you see a big minute total out of the two of them here on this slate. And I think it's quite possible that one of the two of them has a super big night. Which one of the two of them? I don't know. I can never tell. Honestly, I just play multiple lineups and play one of each. Like I think it's quite possible that one of these two guys is going to be great. I don't know which one. Curtis Jones comes off the bench for them, and he is their usage leader off the bench. He is a guy that comes in and puts up a lot of stats off the bench. But how much is he going to play in this game where it's actually projected to be close? It's not going to be a super blowout, and you're going to see full minutes from Lipsey and Gilbert. I don't know. I think Jones is a little too expensive. I'm going to wait and see and hopefully get back with him later in the week once I know what his minutes and usage are going to look like. Josh Jefferson is a transfer from St. Mary's who starts for this team. He was great in the game against IU Indy, but I don't know what his minutes are going to look like because they also play Milan Momcilovic quite a lot. Those two guys, I don't know what it's going to look like. The guy that I do like in this one is Deshaun Jackson. I've talked about him before. He's a transfer from Charlotte. He's yet to play more than 19 minutes a game for Iowa State. They've not needed it, though. They're going to need it going up against Janai Broom. If Jackson plays 30-plus minutes at his usage rate with his rebounding rates and his ability to block shots, if he plays a ton of minutes, he can break a slate. And he's been pretty good about staying out of foul trouble. When he was at Charlotte last year, he was pretty good about staying out of foul trouble. But Janai Broom might get him in foul trouble. So I think Deshaun Jackson, high risk, high reward type of play. Last game of the night is Dayton taking on UNC. This is the last game of the day in Maui. Ken Pom has UNC as the winners of this one, 78-74, with a game total of 152 points. That is the highest total on the night slate, which is interesting because Dayton doesn't exactly get up and down. North Carolina does. So you're seeing a little bit of a contrast in styles here. Look, I'll be honest. You can consider me like your local Dayton Flyers expert, right? We're like repping them here on the show tonight. My dad went to the University of Dayton, so oftentimes I watch a lot of Dayton basketball with him. Talk a lot of Dayton basketball with him. I will never forget last year, we went to the NCAA tournament to watch Texas play Tennessee. And we were in the concourse of the Spectrum Center watching Dayton, Nevada on the TV. It was like unforgettable to see them make that comeback. Like, this is a team that I am rooting for. It's a team that I know a lot about. So I do think I can provide some knowledge for you guys here on the Dayton Flyers. So for Dayton, the guy I'm the most interested in DFS is Malachi Smith. The reason why, Dayton runs a huge ball screen offense, and it's a ball screen continuity offense. So basically, if you don't get it on the first look, you're going to pass it, and you're going to have more opportunities to run pick and roll and go from there, right? Well, Malachi Smith is the point guard. He is the engine that starts this offense. He is a slasher. He is not a shooter, and he is a guy who makes things happen off of these ball screens. And if he's not going to be scoring on his own, then he's going to be generating assists. You look at the first 3 games this season, 29, 28, and 47 DraftKings points. They didn't really need it a whole lot from him in the last 2, but this is a guy that if he plays a ton of minutes is going to be out there with a high usage rate. He can get a ton of peripheral stats. He's going to get steals as well. He's a great defender. And to me, he's the guy I want in my lineups at $6,400. Like, that's how I feel about Malachi Smith. Now, the other guy that I would want in my lineup is Enoch Cheeks because, we mentioned how this is a ball screen continuity offense. Well, when the ball gets swung, it goes to one of the wings. And Enoch Cheeks is a guy who executes very well in that situation from the wing. He's also a guy who has a super high rebound rate for a guard, super high steal rate for a guard as well. averaging over 3 per game. And so this is another guy who has a chance to break a DraftKings slate, right? He's an elite defender. Dayton is going to need his defense here in this one. So I absolutely think Enoch Cheeks is worth a play as well. Nate Santos is the guy that coming into the season I would have told you was Dayton's best overall player. In terms of DraftKings scoring, though, he can be a little enigmatic. He can get in foul trouble because he's a little undersized at the 4, but he can stretch the floor. He can get hot from 3. He hit 6 threes in their last game against New Mexico State. So I think he's worth a look, but I think on paper, Cheeks and Malachi Smith set up his better plays. Zed Key is Dayton's new starting center. He's a transfer from Ohio State. In the Northwestern game, which is what I think you want to look at, played 30 minutes in that game. Wasn't used a whole lot offensively, only took 4 shots, but put up 21 DraftKings points. I think in this game being a close game environment, Zed Key is going to play a lot of minutes. And I think that they're going to need his minutes because he's a grown man down low. And North Carolina's got some size. They're not Armando Bacot, but they've got some size. I think Dayton is going to need Zed Key to play a lot of minutes. And so if he does play a lot of minutes, that certainly makes him a viable DraftKings play. Posh Alexander is a transfer from Butler who I just don't think is priced correctly for his role. He's coming off the bench. He's not a supremely high usage player off the bench. Yes, he can get you peripheral stats, but I don't think he's playing enough minutes to really be worth it at $6,500. If he was $4,500, I'd be pretty interested in. Javon Bennett is the other starter that I haven't mentioned yet. He's kind of like a hybrid version of what I said about Nate Santos and Malachi Smith. He can put up a lot of peripheral stats in a hurry with rebounds and assists. He can be super hot or super cold from 3. Very enigmatic play, but I think it's quite likely that he's going to play a decent amount of minutes. $5,100 is not a bad price tag for him. Emile Latong, the Frenchman, is their backup big. Isaac Jack is also a backup big. Their backup wing, Jacob Connor, is out, and so Hamad Musa is probably going to play a decent amount of minutes. He's only $3,100, but that would be like a dart throw type of play. I don't know how many minutes he's actually going to play, and I don't know what it's going to look like when he actually does. But $3,100, just worth mentioning. Now, on the UNC side, I actually think that Dayton matches up pretty well against North Carolina. Dayton has very small guards. That's like one of their weaknesses. They're also not a great rebounding team. But Carolina is not a team that's going to exploit either of those. Carolina's got small guards. Carolina has 2 bigs that are just okay. They're big, but they're okay. And Carolina doesn't have a lot of depth. So I think that this is actually a pretty good matchup for Dayton, if I'm being honest. But let's talk about these Carolina guys. So RJ Davis is their best player, their highest usage player. But Dayton's got some pretty good perimeter defenders. I don't think I want to be going after RJ Davis in this game at $9,200 when there's other options on the slate that I would rather have for cheaper, or I could just pay up for Janai Broome. Yes, there's a ton of upside with RJ Davis. Yes, he could break the slate. I just don't think it sets up that well for him. I just don't. Elliot Cadeau is a guy who can really stuff a stat sheet. Great assist rate, great steal rate. Dayton's not a team that turns the ball over a whole lot, though. So I don't think this is necessarily the best spot for Cadeau to get a lot of steals. With Dayton also looking to slow the game down, I don't think it's the best spot for him to get a lot of assists. I don't think this is the best spot to play Elliot Cadeau. The argument is, well, if Dayton's going to lock down RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau is not going to be doing a whole lot, then Seth Trimble might be worth a look because he's got some pretty good rates as well in terms of his rebounding, assist, and steal rate, but he's much cheaper. And $5,500, I think Seth Trimble is worth a look. He's going to play a lot of minutes for this Carolina team as well. After that, Jalen Washington is their starting center. Dayton has had trouble in the past and a little bit this season, specifically against Northwestern on the offensive boards. If anybody were to hurt them this game on the offensive boards, it would be Jalen Washington. The problem is that he's played only 18 to 23 minutes every game. He's not playing super high minute totals, which is really hard to break a DraftKings slate when you're not playing super high minute totals. The other bigs that play for them are Van Allen Lubin, Jalen Withers, and Ty Claude. But again, it's like they keep rotating these bigs so much, it's really hard to advocate for playing them when they're not playing a ton of minutes. It's really hard to score a lot of DraftKings points. The one in terms of their profile that I think is the best is Jalen Washington. But again, if he's only going to play between 18 and 23 minutes, it's hard to put up a lot of DraftKings points if that's the case. All right, but that's going to do it for the night slate. And we've gotten through both the early and the night slates here on Monday, November 25th. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. I really do appreciate it. But we're going to go ahead and get on out of here. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of our college basketball content the rest of the season, as well as all of our college football content for the rest of the season. We're hoping to be back later in the week for a college basketball episode. You'll know when it drops if you are subscribed. But all right, that's going to do it for us, y'all. Hopefully we gave you guys all the information you need to build some some winning lineups on both the early and the main slates here on Monday. Best of luck to you guys on both those slates. Hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.